There has been many controversial decisions in the UFC recently, where the grapplers who do much less damage end up winning. Usually the match goes like this. The grappler shoots in for a takedown against the striker. The striker's takedown defense is below par, and the rest of the round end up with the grappler on top and striker pinned down struggling to get up. However, very little, if any, damage is caused by the one in the so-called dominant position. Also, sometimes the one who was taken down will get back up, and unless a striker wins with a 10-8 round or gets a knockdown, the takedown alone will most likely push the judges to give the round to the grappler. My argument is, if the grappler is zero threat from the dominant position, so from the takedown he hasn't advanced or isn't laying down any ground and pound, should it be scored so highly? I.e. the takedown, should the takedown be scored so highly? Because this isn't a wrestling match. At its core, MMA is an actual fight. That's what it was built off. The original MMA, the original UFC events were to see what style was the best. You want the rules to be where anything goes almost, but keeping it sports-like. Now, in a fight, isn't the main objective to hurt your opponent? In a fight, should anything other than offense score points? Isn't pinning and holding your opponent on the ground, who is a striking threat, then be more of a defensive position, more of a defensive move, like blocking punches, because you're nullifying his striking to protect yourself against the danger that you see coming from that person. Now, if a round is close and very little damage has been caused, I agree, give the round based on control time. But damage should be primary and control time secondary. And a takedown with no follow-up shouldn't even be scored, in my opinion. The UFC rules clearly favour the grappler. The scoring system proves this, where a takedown with zero damage can literally win you the round. I think takedowns should be the means to scoring points, as in going for ground and pound, get into a more dominant position where you're gonna threaten with the subs. These are things that should score you points, not the takedown in itself, because the takedown in itself doesn't score any damage. And this isn't just me saying it. There's a lot of prominent figures in the MMA community who are also saying this. Someone like, for example, Firas Zahabi, in a podcast recently, he also touched on this subject.
By a takedown. And the rest was just timing, kind of not engaging the striking, running around, not engaging the striking. And then when the time is right, he shoots, takes you down, holds you, just eats up the clock for 2 minutes, and then nothing happens. He circles around, and all of a sudden, he wins. He does that like rinse and repeat, does it again. I think we have to show, I think a good rule would be that the takedown, you have to do something with it. And of course, they've tried to implement this. You have to do something with it. And it can't be a defensive takedown. Like, you're hitting me. I'm losing the striking. I'm not doing well. And then I take you down and I hold you. I just hold you on for dear life. And then I wait for the bell rings. And then you guys give me the round. That makes no sense. I think if you get a takedown, you have to improve your position, a dominant position, or you have to land some kind of damage. If not, the takedown shouldn't count for anything. Because why did I take you down? What was the point of me taking you down? I'm trying to get an advantage.
Now, we all know who mentioned in here, who we're talking about. And that person is Merab. Merab is a master at winning rounds without scoring much damage, without even threatening once with the submission, but just using the rules to his advantage. Just like his training partner, Aljo, absolute master at winning rounds without really doing much. If we were to rewatch some of his fights and put our damage glasses on, I think the results will be different. For example, Jose Aldo, when you fought Aldo, or even Sean O'Malley, to be honest, his most recent fight, if we saw the amount of damage he inflicted on his opponents, it was very, very minimal. Now, I'm not saying any of these are robberies, because under UFC rules, I have to probably say that he won. Sean O'Malley won, I think, a little bit different. But if we go off purely off the UFC rules, then yeah, there's no debate, most likely, that he did win those fights. My argument is the rules need to be more balanced. This isn't a wrestling match, it is a fight. If Merab was to fight on the street, I don't think his takedowns will lead to people saying he won. And that's the thing, I don't think anyone outside of the MMA world will ever say takedowns and control time will win you the round, because they're not really inflicting damage. And at the core of MMA, the reason why UFC was established in the first place is to see what style of fighting is better. Now, the only way you can establish something like that is by seeing what style can cause the most damage. Who would win? Who's going to get the knockout? Who's going to choke you out? Who's going to just inflict more damage on the opponent? And recently, I don't think we're seeing UFC lived true to its roots. Some other fights, if we was to put our damage glasses on and we was to view the fight from a damage perspective, would be I'm trying to think of more recent fights, but Aldo versus Batista, that was the other day. I'm thinking if we was to score that fight differently, if we was to score that fight based on damage and damage alone, maybe we'll give it to Aldo. We'll give it to Jose Aldo. Another one is Jose Aldo versus Merab. Jose Aldo is so prone to losing fights like that, especially recently, because what he does is he gets pinned up against the cage. No one could take him down, and it just turns into a stalemate. So who do you give the round to? You give it to the guy who's supposedly controlling the round. Now, Aljamain Sterling versus Yan, another fight. If we used to rewatch it and score it based off damage, maybe we would give it the other way. Number 2, that is, by the way. Again, I'm not saying these are robberies. Under UFC rules, the winner has fairly won. In all the fights that I just mentioned, I believe. But based on damage, it would be a different story. Also, before anyone says I'm some sort of bloodthirsty monster, I love the grappling in UFC personally, and I absolutely hate when fans start booing when fights go down to the ground. Grappling is a beautiful skill and effective when you use it offensively. The best grappling in my offense and the most meaningful grappling that you do see in the UFC is from the flyweight division. Guys like Taira and Pantoja, especially when Taira and Royval fought last weekend, that was a beautiful example of how to use your grappling offensively from Taira. And also Royval, that was absolute class. The grappling in that division is amazing, and they always use it to get into a better position or more offensive position, or from a position where you can attack from. You rarely see in that division they start stalling, and that's why I think flyweight is probably the best division in the UFC. But that's a different story for another day. Now, other than the scoring system, there are some rules which clearly favor the grapplers. One of them is no strikes to the back of the head. Now, I understand this is for safety reasons. The back of your head is like a very fragile part of your skull that probably could break easily. I don't know the science behind it, but that's what I'm guessing. But imagine when you're pinned up against the cage, like a lot of fighters like to do. Merab likes to do it. Batista was doing it to Jose Aldo the other day. Usman used to do it quite a lot. Now imagine if he was allowed to do it, if he was to land a 12-6 elbow and straight to the back of the skull from that position. Now, would we see people trying to pin up against the cage like that anymore? I don't think so. When they're low on the hips and they're just pinning him against the cage, like, you see guys win rounds like that, and that's crazy. That's not why is that even counted as a dominant position? Clearly he's playing defensively, but you get control time and you win rounds off of positions like this. Now, I understand the grappler could also utilize this position, because, for example, if he's in turtle, he could start landing strikes, hammer fists and elbows or whatever it is to the back of the skull. Now, I understand he could use that position, but I'm not too fussed with this rule because it would go both ways, and I think it will allow a lot more freedom in the cage, to be honest. Like, we'll see fights go differently. I think if like 12-6 elbows were allowed to the back of their skull, but that's one rule I think favors the grappler, especially when you're pinned up against a cage. Now, the rule that I think the one rule that I've got the biggest problem with is that you can't knee a grounded opponent. This is the worst rule ever. Even though they have changed it slightly, or I think it's changing in November, it's supposed to be, so next month. The new rule states a fighter shall be considered grounded and may not be legally kneed or kicked to the head when any part of their body other than their hands or feet is in contact with the canvas. So that means if their hands are on the ground and their feet are on the ground, so their knees not on the ground, they're not considered as grounded, so you can knee them from that position. But this position rarely does happen. Like, maybe you can land a knee as they're coming back up, and I guess that's what's going to happen more often now. But for the most part, they will have a knee or an elbow down. Like, they'll be in like a turtle kind of position, and something will be down, so you can't land the knee. Like, we saw Demetrius Johnson get KO'd, and he's considered the GOAT. He's considered the best ever. Someone who is notorious for using this rule to their advantage is Aljamain Sterling. He has used this stupid rule so many times in his career, even winning fights by getting kneed by Peter Yan. You'll see him on all fours and like dodging punches like a snake. Like he'll snake his way out of these situations, just like moving his head. Almost sometimes he's like inviting a knee. It looks like that's his plan coming into the fight, to invite the knee when he's grounded. Now, what kind of like tactic is that coming into a fight, to get hit by your opponent in a position which I think is legitimate? Now, if someone was allowed to land a lethal soccer kick like you see in UFC, in 1FC, sorry, to the head, you would never see these positions again, these like ridiculous positions. Like against Henry Cejudo, we saw Aljamain Sterling, like he failed a takedown, I think it was, and Cejudo sprawled. Now he's on top, and you just see Aljamain Sterling just lay in turtle position, because there's not much Cejudo can do. Maybe he can transition to the back, but my point is, why do you have to give up such a potentially offensive position? Like if he was allowed to knee from there to the top of the skull, like that's gonna cause the most damage. So why do you have to give up that position? Now, in particular, the way Aljamain Sterling was positioned, if you watch it again, you'll see it that if that was allowed, he wouldn't want to stay there. He would have made a mistake, and then Cejudo could transition to the back or something more advantageous from there. Now, these are two rules that I can think of right now. There might be more, but in particular, the rule that states no knees to a grounded opponent is ridiculous, and also the change that's coming in November is not gonna change the game much, in my opinion. I think it's basically the same thing. It's just now your hands can touch the ground. To sum up everything, MMA should be scored primarily on damage. At the end of the day, it is a fight, not a wrestling match with kicks and punches. Dana seems to want more action in his fights after destroying the UFC card, like the one that was in Manchester this year, because of the amount of decisions that took place, which I think he's an absolute casual for. Maybe he should change rules then. I don't think he has full authority over the rules. There's like commission and all of this stuff that he's got to go through, but I think push to change some of the rules, like change some of the rules that or the scoring system that gives rounds over to grapplers just for getting a takedown, you know what I mean, with nothing coming on it, nothing coming from it after. Like if you're landing a couple shots and then you get a takedown and that's all that happened from the fight, and I even get back up, then why does it mean that you win? Yeah, well, that's it.